Hi there.
Hey, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely. No, happy to take any questions and give some information around the non-resident tax process.
Yeah, that's great. We'll just wait for a few minutes, have our viewers or audience join, and then we
Great.
can go through with the questions and answers.
Great. That
Um,
sounds good.
uh, yep. For our audience, as you join, there's a question mark at the bottom, near the comment section. If you have any questions, you can put your questions in there, and Neil will help us with uh, answers. So let's wait for a few minutes. So um, yeah, I'm just happy that the Instagram is back up because it was down today, and that was something I'm happy about.
Yes, I didn't know if this was going to happen. It seemed like it was down all day.
Hmm.
So great that we could make it happen.
Yeah, I've actually had some people ask me about Sprintax and when the live session is, and they actually want to ask questions. So I'm happy that we're doing this.
Great.
Yep. Right, so it's been a few minutes. We have a few people here. Maybe I can start by introducing myself. My name is Akshay Taylor. I work at the Office of International Engagement Office here in ISU, and today we have Neil Duffy joining us from Sprintax. He's the Associate Vice President, and he's here today to answer some questions about non-resident tax related questions. Yep. So I can start by asking this first question. Does every international student have to have file? Does everyone, does every international student have to file a tax return?
Yes, I would say this is probably the number one question that we do get every year. International student can be broken down into two categories for tax purposes. They could be a non-resident for tax purposes, which most will be, but some may actually be a resident for tax purposes. So I guess when we're speaking on this session, we're presuming that everybody is a non-resident, but we'll talk a little more about why you may become a resident shortly. So if you're a non-resident and you've spent any number of days in the US during 2023 and you're on an F, J, M, or Q visa, you will have some sort of filing obligation. And that applies even if you have never worked, you don't have any income, you don't have a taxable scholarship. If you spent even just one day in the US during 2023 on that visa, the minimum that everyone will need to do is Form 8843.
Hmm.
And then after that, if they have triggered any US income whatsoever, they'll then trigger a federal return and then possibly a state return, depending on the state they live in.
Okay, thanks for answering that. We have a question here. Is it, so I'll put it up there. Is it right that we have to file the NR and the Illinois form, IL form?
So I guess it depends. In terms of the non-resident form, I presume that's referring to a federal tax return.
Hmm.
And to trigger a federal tax filing requirement, you do have to earn over $0 in US source income. So
Hmm.
that $0 can, anything over that can be anything from, a job, maybe a salary or your wages. It could be a taxable scholarship, which is, most common for F1 or J1 students. So if you are receiving a scholarship and that scholarship just covers tuition, that's not taxable. But if your scholarship covers areas outside of tuition, let's say room and board, it could be a living stipend, anything that's outside of the tuition will be considered income. And the IRS essentially look at it the same as wages or salary in that you will pay tax on it. And in that case, you will trigger a federal filing requirement. On the state side, then, it will depend on the state that you live in, the income that you've received, and the amount of time you've spent in that state. So the rules do change from state to state. Now, once you enter all of your information within Sprintax, the software will ask you some basic questions. And at the end of the questionnaire, it'll tell you if you've triggered a federal return, it'll tell you if you've triggered a state return, and then if you're due a refund back or if you owe the IRS money for each. And then based on that, we can prepare the correct returns for you.
Okay, thank you so
Yep,
much.
no
We have
problem.
another question. If a student has a trading account, how can they report that in Sprintax? And are we supposed to enter transaction by transaction? What if you have many trades?
So if you do have a trading account and let's say you purchased stock during 2023, but you never sold that stock, in that case, you would not receive an income document for that because you never realized that gain. It's only if you sold that stock within 2023 that generally you'll be issued a 1099 or a 1042S for that. Now, really, because you're a non-resident, you should receive a 1042S, but it's worth noting that in most cases, your brokerage account company isn't going to know that you're a non-resident. So a lot of students will get a 1099. Um, Within Sprintex, you do need to enter each trade one by one, and we will guide you through how to do that once you advise what document that you actually received.
All right, thank you. Just to remind the audience that has joined, you can put in your question by tapping the question mark icon down there, and we can answer the question. There's a question from the comment section. Do we need to mail the forms with a W-2 or can we just do it online?
So if you are just filing Form 8843, then you will need to mail that directly to the IRS. If you're also using Sprintax for your state return, you will need to mail that to the IRS. But for your federal return, some non-residents will be eligible to e-file their return. Now, whether you're eligible or not is all up to the IRS, and essentially you have to meet a number of criteria. And I guess that the biggest piece is that you do need to have a social security number. So if you're preparing your federal return with an ITIN, then you will not be eligible to e-file. There's some other criteria, like if you don't have a unique identifier on your 1042S, maybe your W-2 is missing some sort of identifier, like an employee ID number. And if you receive capital gains income, again, there's a number of different areas that might negate you from actually being eligible to e-file. If you go through the Sprintax process and you see that you're not eligible to e-file, have a look at our blog. If you just Google Sprintax and e-file, it'll give you a full list of all of the criteria. So you'll be able to look at that and say, okay, this is why I'm not actually eligible to e-file.
Right, thank you. Um, uh, Another question I can put out there is I've received a W-2 or 1042S form from ISU. What are they and do I need them for taxes?
Sure. So the W-2 and the 1042S form is essentially a summary that you'll receive at the end of the year, providing you with information like your overall income and how much tax was withheld. So let's start with the W-2. The W-2 will generally be issued from your direct employer. So if you have received wages or salary would be the most common example. Generally, you'll receive a W-2. The 1042S then will provide you with a summary of different income types. So you'll generally not receive a 1042S for, let's say, an on-campus job or for an employer. Generally, the 1042S will, and the most common example for international students will be a taxable scholarship. So that taxable scholarship we mentioned a while ago that covers areas outside of tuition, like room and board or a living stipend. Generally, the 1042S will provide you with information on that.
All right.
So it really does depend on the type of income that you will receive or have received.
Right. Thank you. Just again, if you have questions, just put them in the comment section, or you could just tap the question mark down there. Another question I can ask is like, what is the deadline to file tax returns with the IRS?
Sure. So the deadline is April the 15th. So you do need to have, and if you are mailing it, you do need to have your return postmarked before that date. The IRS doesn't necessarily have to receive it by then. But I would say the earlier you get your return in, the faster it will be processed. So if you are due a refund, you will want to get that in as soon as possible. Because if you leave it closer to April the 15th, there's going to be a much larger backlog and the processing times are going to be much larger also.
Okay. We have a question saying, what resources can RA for this year can use? The question is not clear enough. Is that a question you can answer?
I,
If
I,
you
gue-
can
I
understand.
I guess if the question is asking what resources are available to international students when they're doing their taxes, I would say have a look at the Sprintax webinars. This is obviously a very short form session. We're giving you some quick basic information, but on the actual Sprintax webinars, we go
Hmm.
into all of this in a lot more detail. We also have the Sprintax blog, where we tend to provide you with additional information on subjects that are a little more technical. We have short form YouTube videos that generally we look at our live chat function and we say, okay, what issues are trending at the moment? And then based on that, we'll release 30-second to 1 minute videos which explain different topics that are trending. And then obviously, if you're using Sprintax, we do have live chat. So if you're not too sure how to answer a question as you're going through the process, feel free to reach out to our live chat team and somebody there will be able to assist you.
Right. Thank you.
Sure.
Another question, can international students use TurboTax or resident tax softwares?
So if you're considered a non-resident for tax purposes, you're not permitted to use TurboTax or a software that will prepare a resident tax return form. So
Mhm.
if you're a non-resident, the form for a federal return that you should prepare is Form 1040-NR. But if you use TurboTax, they'll prepare a resident or US citizen return, which will be Form 1040. Now that seems, like there isn't too much of a difference there, but it really is quite big because if you prepare an incorrect tax return with TurboTax, they're going to think that you're a US citizen or resident for tax purposes, and they're going to give you a ton of additional tax credits that you're not entitled to. And if you submit that to the IRS, you're essentially submitting an incorrect tax return and claiming tax back that you're not entitled to. So it's important just to be aware where you fall into that categorization, and then based on that, choose your software wisely. I will say on step one of Sprintax, you can determine if you're a resident or non-resident, and we'll ask you some basic yes or no questions, and then we'll ask you for all of your entry and exit dates since you first started coming to the US. And by giving us that information, we can determine if you're a resident or a non-resident for tax purposes. And if we find that you're a resident, we'll stop the process, a pop-up box will appear, and we'll recommend that you do use TurboTax. So if you're ever not too sure, I would say that's the best free tool to use to get a definite answer.
All right, thank you. For everyone new audience that's joining us, make sure if you have any questions, put them in the comment section, or you can tap on the question mark below. Uh, Another question would be, what advice would you have for someone who is filing their tax return for the first time?
So I would say number one, make sure you have all of your income documents. So the W-2 and the 1042S and the 1099 that we mentioned a while ago. If you start the process, prepare your return, and then realize that you're due a second income document, it just causes quite a lot of confusion. So make sure that the income documents you have received represent all of the income that you received throughout the year. And then once you have that, have all of your documents ready, have your passport, have your I-94 or DS-2019 ready, and go into the Sprintax software. And as you're entering all of the information, it'll make things a little easier to have everything around you and readily available.
All right, thank you. Okay, another question. Does the International Office help international students and scholars with tax resources, and where can I find those resources?
So I guess that's probably a question more so for Illinois State University, but I guess just from looking at your international page, I can see
Yeah.
there are definitely quite a lot of resources
Mhm.
there. Obviously, and I would say this is generally for most international offices. You won't generally you won't answer any tax questions, so that'll be the job of Sprintax.
Mhm.
So if there's any tax questions that need to be answered, I would say go to the software, fill out the questionnaire, and in a lot of cases, that's where the answer will come from. And if you're not able to fill out the questionnaire, then our live chat team will be a good resource.
Right. Thank you. Um, just wait for the audience if you have any other questions. Any advice you have for international students who are going to use Sprintax?
So I think outside of being prepared and obviously having all of your documents, I think read each question twice, maybe even three times. There are pop-up boxes for each of those questions as you go through Sprintax. So definitely have a look at that. We try to make it so the questions are as straightforward as possible, but obviously in a lot of cases we can't deviate from the IRS language too much. So we try to help as much as possible with guides and pop-up boxes with webinars. And also if you go to our YouTube channel, we do have a guide on how to answer each step of the Sprintax process. So just by looking at that before you start your actual return,
Mhm.
you should be well prepared to answer anything that comes your way.
Right. Thank you. We have a question. Um, why do I owe the government money on my tax return when I file as a non-resident?
Yeah, so as a non-resident, there's very few tax credits or deductions you can claim. So when you go to do your non-resident tax return, you're essentially balancing the books with the IRS. And what I mean by that is if you had a job where you received a salary or wages, or maybe a taxable scholarship, a certain amount of tax is normally withheld from that throughout the tax year. Tax was withheld, then you will owe the IRS money. You'll owe the difference. But if too much tax was withheld, that will be your refund. So for anybody that owes the IRS money, it means that your wages or your salary or maybe your scholarship didn't have the perfect amount of tax withheld. So you are balancing the books with the IRS.
Yeah, thank you. We have another question from the comment section. Is there a fixed percentage of taxes to be deduced from an international student?
So it is the graduated tax rate. And if you Google that, you'll see exactly the different tiers. But essentially, the more income you earn, the more the tax rate will change. So for example, it could be on your first $10,000 earned, it could be 9%, and so on and so on. So the same graduated rate does apply to non-residents, similar to it also applies to residents. The only difference is that residents can claim the standard deduction, whereas non-residents cannot. But other than that, the rules are very similar in terms of the actual tax percentages.
Thank you. Um, from the audience, if you have any other questions, please put them in the comment section or the question mark, tap the question mark. I can ask a question. How do I know if I'm a resident or a non-resident for tax purposes?
So I would always say the best way to do that is to use that step one of Sprintax. And that's going to give you a 100% definite, accurate answer. So if you go on, fill out the yes or no answers, there'll be a question, when was your first ever visit to the US? That's asking for your first ever visit ever, not just on your current visa status. It might be J or F. That could be you went to Disneyland on a vacation with your family when you were 5 years of age. So that's the date you'll put in there. You'll then give us all of your entry and exit dates since you first started entering the US, and the software will work its magic and provide you with a residency determination.
Thank you. Right. Do we have any other questions? Please let us know. And as someone who's using Sprintax for the first time now that they've been on this live session or to use Sprintax, and maybe they want to consult someone, what would be the best channel to reach out to Sprintax?
Sure. So Sprintax it's a DIY software similar to TurboTax. So once you go onto the software, you'll fill out the questionnaire. The questions should be self-explanatory, but if you do need assistance, you can contact us at hello@sprintax.com, or else I would say the better option is to use our live chat because you'll get an answer fairly straight away.
Right. Thank you. Right. Do we have any other questions from the audience? Right. We have a question. Okay. Someone mentioned that last year they received a taxpayer notification for individual income tax stating that their social security may have been used inappropriately for tax purposes, and they removed their return from their account. So, um, How can they know if the letter is actually from the government or it's a scam?
I would always encourage a non-resident to reach out to the IRS directly. If they're not sure about any notices, reach out, have the discussion with the IRS, and they'll provide you with information over the phone. Just a note to say the IRS will never call you. The IRS will never send you an email. And if you have received a phone call or an email from the IRS, there's a good chance it's a scam. So they'll only generally reach out to you via mail. So if you're not too sure, again, why not be careful and call the IRS on their official phone number, and they'll be able to verify very easy if that notice was in fact from them.
Right, thank you. There's a question in the comment section, but I'm not sure if that's for tax purposes. Are there any other questions? If there are no other questions, I think we'll be wrapping it up now. Thank you so much, Neil, for joining us today in the live session and answering these questions. And make sure for the audience, make sure to reach out to Sprintax if you have any other questions. And thank you for joining us today. And yep, thank you so much. Have a great
Thank you
day,
very
everyone.
much, Akshay.
Thank you, Neil. See you.
Have a good day,
Bye.
everyone.
You too.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.